The final feast. It was a cold, rainy evening in Seabrook when journalist Elliot received an anonymous tip about a hidden community deep in the woods near the cliffs. The message spoke of strange rituals performed in a secluded cabin. Eager to uncover the truth, Elliot set off into the forest, flashlight and notebook in hand, determined to document whatever he found. The deeper he walked, the heavier the air felt. The damp earth clung to his boots, and the towering trees seemed to close in around him. Distant whispers floated on the wind, voices that didn't sound human. The feeling of being watched intensified with every step. After hours of trekking, he finally spotted the cabin, its wooden walls covered in moss and rot, a faint smoke rising from the chimney. A dim, flickering light seeped through the cracks in its boarded-up windows. Peering inside, he saw people gathered around a long wooden table laden with food. At first glance, it looked like a normal feast: roasted meat, vegetables, and fresh bread. But as he squinted, his stomach lurched. The meat wasn't from animals. It was pale, almost translucent. Some pieces still had traces of fingernails. The diners were gaunt, their eyes sunken, their movements mechanical, as if they had been eating this way for centuries. A figure turned its hollow gaze toward the window. Elliot froze. The door creaked open, revealing a man with an unsettlingly serene smile. "You've come just in time," he said. "We're preparing tonight's offering." Before Elliot could react, strong hands grabbed him and dragged him inside. The stench inside was unbearable, a mixture of decay, iron, and cooked flesh. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars containing preserved body parts, each labeled with dates and names, a grotesque archive of victims. In the corner, a bubbling cauldron emitted a sickening aroma. The man introduced himself as Father Elias. "Our community has existed for generations," he explained. "Long ago, famine struck Seabrook. To survive, our ancestors turned to the only resource left: each other. Over time, it became more than survival. It became salvation." He gestured at the others. "We do not age like you do. The flesh sustains us." Elliot pleaded for his freedom, but Elias simply smiled. "Don't worry, son. You'll understand soon enough." That night, he witnessed horrors beyond imagination. A young woman, captured days prior, was brought to the table. Her screams echoed through the wooden walls as she was prepared for the meal. By the time the feast was over, only bones remained, thrown into the fire like discarded scraps. Elliot thought he would be next. Instead, they locked him in a small room adjacent to the main hall. Through the thin walls, he could hear the villagers feasting, laughing, telling stories. Occasionally, someone would knock on his door, whispering, "Join us." Each time, he refused, curling into himself, hunger gnawing at his resolve. Days passed. Food was brought to him sparingly: a crust of bread, a sip of water. Hunger became unbearable. One evening, the aroma of freshly cooked meat filled the air. Weak and delirious, Elliot gave in. He stepped out of his room and sat at the table. The villagers watched as he took his first hesitant bite. The taste was unlike anything he had ever known: rich, tender, indescribably satisfying. A warmth spread through his body, momentarily eclipsing his fear. Father Elias leaned in. "Welcome to the family." Days turned to weeks. Elliot was no longer a prisoner. He was part of them. He learned their ways, their rituals, the horrifying truth behind their existence. They weren't just eating strangers, they were breeding captives, raising them solely for consumption. Newborns were marked from birth, their fate sealed before they could even speak. Horrified, Elliot knew he had to escape. Using stolen ink and scraps of paper, he documented everything he had seen, hiding the notes in the fireplace. On the 15th night, when the villagers held a grand feast, he made his move. As they drank and celebrated, he slipped out the door and bolted into the woods. But they followed. Dozens of shadowy figures moved through the trees, their glowing eyes cutting through the darkness. A guttural growl echoed behind him. He ran faster, branches whipping his face. Then he tripped. Pain shot through his leg as blood seeped from a fresh wound. The figures slowed, sniffing the air. Realizing his mistake, Elliot forced himself up and stumbled toward the edge of the forest. Just as his strength gave out, he collapsed onto the cold, damp earth. Hours later, a search party found him unconscious and brought him to safety. Back in civilization, Elliot tried to report what he had seen, but no one believed him. Authorities searched the woods, but there was no trace of the cabin, the villagers, or the horrors he had endured. Months passed. Elliot changed his name, moved to another city, tried to forget. But the nightmares persisted. At night, he heard whispers from the shadows, flickers of movement at the corner of his vision, a sense that he was never truly alone. Then, one evening, he spotted a familiar face in a grocery store. Father Elias, smiling, watching. Panic surged through him. That night, he barricaded himself inside his apartment, gripping a knife. The doorbell rang. A delivery man stood outside, holding a package wrapped in brown paper. Elliot hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a freshly cooked meal, still steaming. The scent was unmistakable, human flesh. A note lay beside it, written in crimson ink. "This is just the beginning.